Welcome to our deep dive into Deleuze's Nietzschean philosophy.
Ah, yes.
We'll be using Deleuze and Guattari's dictionary
Okay.
and some of their other texts to help illuminate this work.
Right.
It's a dense and fascinating book.
It is.
We're aiming for a very thorough engagement with the ideas,
Okay.
moving beyond surface interpretations to unpack the real force of Deleuze's Nietzsche.
It's a project that definitely demands careful attention.
Yeah.
Because Deleuze's reading of Nietzsche is anything but straightforward.
Even the preface hints at some of the challenges ahead.
Right.
Deleuze points out that Nietzsche was received in England largely by artists and writers, not so much among philosophers.
Yeah, interesting.
Why might that be?
Well, Deleuze suggests that the Anglo-American philosophical tradition, with its emphasis on empiricism and pragmatism, may have struggled to really contend with Nietzsche's ideas.
Because
They're more disruptive and challenging.
Can you elaborate a little more on what makes Nietzsche so disruptive in this context?
Well, Deleuze argues that Nietzsche demands a different kind of thinking altogether.
Okay.
One that goes beyond the confines of traditional rationalism or empiricism.
So you're saying he's not presenting a system?
He's not at all. It's more like a mode of questioning that really unsettles the very foundations of those systems.
So the value lies not in finding the right answers,
Exactly.
but in formulating the right questions.
Precisely.
And those questions often lead us down unsettling paths,
They do.
forcing us to confront our most deeply held assumptions about truth,
Yes.
morality, and the nature of reality itself.
Absolutely.
And this brings us to Chapter 1, Introduction Evaluation,
Okay.
where Deleuze introduces a distinction that's crucial to understanding his entire approach,
Right.
the difference between interpretation and evaluation.
It's essential to recognize that for Deleuze's Nietzsche, these are not distinct operations. They are deeply intertwined.
So interpretation in this sense is not simply about deciphering meaning.
It's not just about deciphering. It's more about grasping the forces and values that are expressed through those meanings.
And this is where Deleuze's concept of genealogy comes into play.
Absolutely.
Which he's using in a very specific way, drawing on Nietzsche's own genealogical method.
If we turn to the dictionary entry on genealogy, Deleuze explicitly states that it's not about tracing the historical origins of ideas in a linear fashion.
Not a straight line.
No, it's about uncovering the power dynamics, the forces that shape those ideas and imbue them with value.
So it's a much more dynamic and critical approach to history than a simple chronological narrative.
Exactly. Genealogy in this sense is about excavating the hidden forces that operate beneath the surface of history.
These forces that determine what we believe, what we value, and ultimately how we act in the world.
Precisely.
This leads us to Chapter 2, the tragic. And one of Nietzsche's most potent concepts, resentment.
This is where things get really interesting. Deleuze sees resentment as this volatile mixture of impotence and hatred. A reactive force that arises from a very profound sense of powerlessness.
And this is key to understanding how reactive forces function.
It is.
They're not simply negative, but fueled by this underlying resentment.
Yes, and Deleuze connects it to another crucial concept, bad conscience.
Using the dictionary.
Yes, the entry on resentment. He connects it to the entry on bad conscience. And we begin to see how these ideas will interweave and play out throughout his interpretation of Nietzsche.
So we're starting to see the contours of Nietzsche's critique of morality taking shape here.
We are.
But before we get there, we need to grasp the foundation of his philosophy. Which Deleuze explores in Chapter 3, the philosophy of the will to power.
This is where Deleuze truly challenges our conventional understanding of the will to power. He emphasizes that it's not a thing in itself, but a relation between forces.
And this is where it gets radical. For Deleuze's Nietzsche, everything is force.
Everything.
Even those things that appear passive or inert.
Precisely.
Could you give me an example of how something seemingly passive, like a rock, could be an expression of the will to power?
Deleuze actually uses the dictionary entry on force to illustrate this point. He even goes so far as to mention atomic disintegration as an example of the will to power operating at the most fundamental level of matter.
Interesting. So it's this constant interplay of forces attracting and repelling, composing and decomposing.
Precisely.
That constitutes the very fabric of reality itself.
Exactly.
That's a truly profound and thought-provoking concept.
It is.
So the will to power is not about an individual drive for domination, but a fundamental principle that permeates the entire universe.
Precisely. It's the driving force behind the ceaseless change and transformation that unfolds at every level of existence.
Which brings us to one of Nietzsche's most famous and perhaps most misunderstood concepts explored in Chapter 4, the eternal return.
This is where Deleuze undertakes a significant act of demystification.
Okay.
He makes it very clear that the eternal return is not about the same events recurring endlessly.
Not the same things coming back over and over again.
No. It's about the affirmation of becoming itself.
Okay.
The selection of that which is fit to return.
So it's not a deterministic concept?
Not at all.
But rather about embracing the creative potential inherent in the process of becoming?
Exactly.
And Deleuze uses a compelling analogy here.
He does.
The dice throw. To explain how chance and necessity are intertwined in the eternal return.
It's a great analogy.
How does the analogy of the dice throw illuminate this concept?
Well, think of it this way.
Okay.
Each roll of the dice is a chance event.
Right.
But the number of possible combinations is finite.
Okay.
So eventually, a particular combination will inevitably repeat.
But it's not the repetition itself that holds significance?
It's not.
It's the affirmation of the entire process.
Yes.
The interplay of chance and necessity that produces that repetition.
Exactly.
So the eternal return is about affirming the entirety of the game.
It is.
Not just specific outcomes.
Yes. And it's about recognizing that this affirmation is a selective process.
Okay.
It's not a matter of everything returning indiscriminately, but rather only that which is fit to return.
So that which embodies the creative power of becoming is selected.
Yes.
This notion of selection, of choosing what returns, seems to resonate with the concept of evaluation that we discussed earlier.
It does, and it sets the stage for Deleuze's exploration of Nietzsche's method in Chapter 5, Nietzsche's Method, where he argues that Nietzsche's philosophical style is not simply a matter of aphorisms and poetic language.
There's a more rigorous and systematic approach at play.
Precisely. He contends that it's about a rigorous, critical method.
Okay.
And this is where the dictionary entry on critique becomes really relevant.
Okay.
Deleuze makes a bold claim here that Nietzsche's work can be understood as a rewriting of Kant's Critique of Pure Reason.
That's a fascinating proposition.
It is.
How does Nietzsche's project relate to Kant's in this sense?
Well, it highlights the very radical nature of Nietzsche's critique.
Okay.
It's not merely about questioning specific knowledge claims, but about interrogating the very foundations of knowledge itself.
So the values and forces that shape our understanding of the world.
Exactly.
So it's about critiquing the tools we use to think.
Yes.
Not just the specific thoughts themselves.
Precisely. And this leads us to one of the most crucial distinctions in Deleuze's reading of Nietzsche.
Okay.
The distinction between active and reactive forces.
Explored in Chapter 6.
Yeah. Active and reactive.
Okay. Let's delve into that distinction a little bit.
Sure.
Active forces are associated with affirmation.
Yes.
Creation, overcoming.
Precisely.
While reactive forces are characterized by denial, negation, and are driven by resentment.
Precisely. And Deleuze emphasizes the link between reactive forces and the development of bad conscience, drawing on the dictionary entry on bad conscience to illuminate its psychological mechanisms.
So bad conscience is ultimately a product of reactive forces.
It is.
It's the internalization of resentment.
Yes, and this internalization takes on a specific form in Nietzsche's genealogy.
Okay.
Leading us to Chapter 7, Development of Resentment. The Judaic Priest, which delves into one of Nietzsche's most controversial analyses.
This is undoubtedly a sensitive topic.
It is.
How do we approach Nietzsche's analysis of the Judaic priest without falling into problematic interpretations?
Well, it's crucial to understand Deleuze's nuanced reading of Nietzsche here.
Okay.
He very carefully situates Nietzsche's argument within its specific historical context. And avoids any hint of anti-Semitism.
So we should avoid reading Nietzsche's critique of the Judaic priest as a condemnation of Judaism itself.
Absolutely. Deleuze focuses on the philosophical and psychological dimensions of the argument, utilizing the dictionary entry on priest to provide additional context.
So he's interested in how the figure of the priest,
yes,
in this particular historical context,
right,
embodies a specific form of reactive morality.
Precisely.
So it's about the role of the priest in shaping a particular type of morality.
Yes.
Not about Judaism as a religion.
Precisely. Deleuze is tracing the genealogy of resentment.
Okay.
And he identifies the Judaic priest as a key figure in the development of a reactive morality that has come to permeate Western thought.
And this development continues in Chapter 8, from resentment to bad conscience, where Deleuze traces the emergence of bad conscience from resentment.
What's crucial here is that Deleuze makes it clear that bad conscience is not simply a result of punishment.
Oh,
it's a complex internalization of reactive forces.
So a turning inward of aggression that generates a sense of guilt and self-directed hatred.
Precisely.
This challenges common assumptions about guilt and punishment, doesn't it?
It does.
We tend to view guilt as a natural response to wrongdoing.
Right.
But Deleuze is suggesting that it's actually a manufactured emotion.
Yes.
A product of a particular moral system.
Exactly. And he uses Nietzsche's analysis of the relationship between punishment and guilt to challenge those assumptions.
Okay.
He highlights the dictionary entry on culture.
Okay.
And Nietzsche's argument that true culture involves the formative activity of the human species,
right,
not merely the internalization of guilt.
So true culture is about creating, shaping, overcoming.
Yes.
Not about punishing ourselves for perceived transgressions.
Precisely.
Oh.
And this leads us to the ultimate expression of the reactive will to power.
Explored in Chapter 9.
Yes. The ascetic ideal and the essence of religion.
Here, Deleuze delves into the ascetic ideal, showing how it manifests not only in religion,
right,
but also in knowledge and morality.
It's about denying the world, denying life itself, in favor of some higher transcendent realm.
And he uses the dictionary entry on ascetic ideal.
Yes, he does.
To illuminate its philosophical underpinnings.
He demonstrates how this ideal has come to dominate Western thought, shaping our values, our desires, and our understanding of ourselves and the world.
So the ascetic ideal represents the ultimate triumph of reactive forces.
It does.
It's the complete denial of the creative power of becoming.
Yes. And it's against this ideal that Nietzsche's philosophy of affirmation stands in stark contrast.
Which brings us to Chapter 10, Affirmation and Negation.
Yes.
Where Deleuze elucidates Nietzsche's radical affirmation.
Right.
Can you elaborate on what distinguishes Nietzsche's affirmation from a naive optimism?
Well, it's not about ignoring or minimizing the darkness and suffering inherent in existence,
right,
but rather a full-fledged confrontation with the negativity of reactive forces.
Okay.
It's an affirmation of becoming in all its complexity.
Embracing even its cruelty and apparent senselessness.
Precisely.
So it's not about pretending that everything is fine.
Yeah.
So it's about confronting the totality of existence.
Yes.
Even the aspects that are painful or difficult to reconcile.
Exactly. And Deleuze connects this to Nietzsche's reading of Heraclitus and the idea of the eternal return as the very being of becoming.
He references the dictionary entry on eternal return to provide a deeper understanding of this pivotal concept.
He does.
Affirming becoming then implies affirming the eternal return.
Yes.
Which means affirming the ceaseless interplay of creation and destruction,
right,
of joy and suffering,
yes,
that constitutes the very fabric of reality.
Precisely. It's a challenging, even daunting concept.
It is.
But also incredibly liberating. Because it frees us from the shackles of reactive morality and opens us to the creative possibilities of a world unburdened by transcendent values.
This leads us to Chapter 11, the sense of affirmation, where Deleuze delves deeper into the meaning of affirmation in Nietzsche's thought.
Yes.
Its connection to the will to power and its implications for ethics and ontology.
Deleuze emphasizes the complex relationship between chance and necessity in the eternal return.
Right.
Again, using the analogy of the dice throw to illustrate this point.
So even while affirming the role of chance, we're not suggesting that everything is random or meaningless.
Not at all.
There's still a sense of order.
Right.
A sense of fate woven into the very fabric of becoming.
And this fate is not imposed from some external source. It emerges from the interplay of forces, from the very nature of the will to power itself.
This brings us to Chapter 12, the double affirmation, Ariadne, and the introduction of one of Nietzsche's most enigmatic figures.
Deleuze explores Ariadne as a symbol of the double affirmation required for the Ubermensch to emerge.
He connects this to the dictionary entry on other.
He does.
And the idea of the other as an expression of a possible world.
A key Deleuzian concept that extends beyond Nietzsche.
So Ariadne represents the affirmation of the other.
Yes.
The affirmation of difference.
Yes.
Which is necessary for the Ubermensch to transcend the limitations of reactive morality and embrace the creative potential of becoming.
Precisely. And this double affirmation is not merely a passive acceptance of what is. It's a creative act. A willing into being of new possibilities.
And finally, we arrive at chapter 13, Dionysus and Zarathustra.
Okay.
Where Deleuze examines the relationship between these two figures, highlighting their distinct roles in Nietzsche's philosophy.
Dionysus embodies the ecstatic affirmation of becoming the primal force of creation and destruction that underlies all existence.
In Zarathustra.
Zarathustra, on the other hand, represents the philosophical and ethical challenge of living in a world defined by becoming.
So he's the prophet of the Ubermensch.
He is.
The one who illuminates the path to overcoming nihilism.
Yes.
And embracing the creative power of the eternal return.
So in a sense, Dionysus is the raw, untamed energy of becoming, while Zarathustra is the one who attempts to channel that energy, to give it form and meaning in a world that has lost its faith in transcendent values.
And Deleuze uses his analysis of the higher man.
He does.
To demonstrate how Zarathustra goes beyond traditional conceptions of heroism.
Yes.
Referencing the dictionary entry on Ubermensch to provide further context.
The Ubermensch is not a hero in the conventional sense. He's not a conqueror or a ruler, but a creator, a destroyer, a dancer on the tightrope of becoming, embracing the chaos, the joy, and the terror of a world without fixed points of reference.
So we've carefully worked our way through Deleuze's interpretation of Nietzsche's philosophy.
Yeah, you have.
Chapter by chapter.
Yes.
Unpacking the core concepts and their interconnections.
Right.
But there's one more crucial concept we need to explore.
Okay.
Nomad thought.
This is where Deleuze and Guattari's work in 1,000 Plateaus becomes particularly relevant.
Okay.
They develop the concept of nomad thought as a mode of thinking that resists fixed categories, boundaries, and hierarchies.
And this connects directly back to Nietzsche's philosophy, doesn't it?
It does.
It's about embracing the eternal return, becoming a nomad in the vast and ever-shifting landscape of existence.
Exactly. And Deleuze draws on the dictionary entries on nomad, line of flight, and war machine to illuminate the key characteristics of nomad thought.
So it's a way of thinking that's constantly in motion.
Yes.
Always becoming. Always challenging the boundaries of what is considered possible.
Precisely.
And this leads us to a provocative question.
Okay.
How can we cultivate a nomadic mindset in our own lives, embracing the creative and disruptive potential of becoming?
That's the challenge Nietzsche and Deleuze leave us with.
It's about becoming philosophers in the Nietzschean sense.
It is. Not mere interpreters of concepts, but creators of new values, new ways of thinking, new ways of being in the world.
It's about embracing the radical potential of thought to transform both ourselves and the world around us.
It is. But this is a project that requires a more in-depth exploration.
Okay.
One that delves into the nuances of nomad thought. And its implications for how we live and think.
Indeed. Nomad thought is a rich and complex concept that deserves its own dedicated analysis.
In 1,000 Plateaus, Deleuze and Guattari introduce the image of the nomad as a figure who traverses smooth space.
Smooth space.
Yes, a space that is undefined, unbounded, and constantly in flux.
So the nomad resists the striations of sedentary thought.
They do.
The fixed categories and hierarchies that attempt to impose order on a world of pure becoming.
Exactly.
So nomad thought is about embracing this fluidity, this resistance to fixed categories.
Precisely. It's about thinking in terms of movement, of flows, of intensities, rather than static entities.
The nomad is always on the move.
Always.
Always becoming other.
Yes.
Always escaping the confines of established thought.
Precisely.
This concept of becoming other seems particularly significant.
It is.
Can you elaborate on its meaning within the context of nomad thought?
Becoming other is not about transforming into something else entirely, but rather about opening oneself to the possibility of transformation, becoming something different from what one currently is.
So it's a process of deterritorialization.
It is.
Of breaking free from the limiting structures of identity and thought that confine us.
Exactly.
So nomad thought encourages us to embrace this ongoing process of deterritorialization of becoming.
And this process is intimately connected to the concept of the line of flight, which Deleuze and Guattari describe as the trajectory of escape. The movement away from the striated spaces of control and towards the smooth spaces of freedom and possibility.
The line of flight sounds like a concept with both liberating and potentially dangerous implications.
It is. The line of flight is not a predetermined path, but rather an improvisational movement, a creative act of escape that involves risk and uncertainty.
A leap into the unknown.
It is.
A gamble on the possibility of becoming something new and unforeseen.
Precisely.
This resonates with Nietzsche's concept of the Overman.
It does.
Who also embodies a kind of creative risk-taking in the face of the unknown.
Absolutely. The Overman is the one who embraces the eternal return, who affirms the creative and destructive forces of becoming, and who forges new values in the absence of transcendent guarantees.
He embodies a certain nomadic spirit then.
He does.
A willingness to wander, to experiment, and to create new possibilities for thought and life.
Exactly.
So nomad thought can be understood as a way of actualizing the Nietzschean ideal of the Overman.
In a sense, yes.
A way of living in accordance with the principles of the eternal return.
It's about embracing the fluidity, the creativity, and the radical openness that characterize the philosophy of becoming.
But how do we cultivate this nomad thought in our own lives, in concrete terms? What are the practices, the techniques that allow us to engage in this kind of nomadic thinking?
Well, Deleuze and Guattari suggests a number of practices, including what they call becoming animal, becoming woman, and becoming imperceptible.
These are not literal transformations.
They're not.
But rather conceptual and experiential exercises. That challenge our habitual ways of thinking and perceiving.
Precisely.
Could you elaborate on one of these practices, perhaps becoming animal?
And
how it relates to nomad thought?
Becoming animal is about opening oneself to the non-human forces that run through us, to the primal energies and modes of perception that connect us to the animal world.
So it's not about literally becoming an animal, but about decentering the human perspective and accessing a more embodied, instinctual way of being.
Exactly.
So it's about tapping into a different kind of intelligence.
It is.
A different way of relating to the world.
Exactly. It's about breaking free from the anthropocentric biases that limit our thinking and experiencing, and allowing ourselves to be affected by the world in a more visceral, immediate way.
This seems to resonate with Deleuze's concept of the body without organs.
It does.
Which challenges the fixed organic organization of the body. And opens up new possibilities for sensation and experience.
The body without organs is a powerful metaphor for the kind of deterritorialized, fluid, and experimental approach to embodiment that nomad thought encourages.
It's about becoming more than a fixed defined entity. And embracing the flows of energy, intensity, and transformation that course through us. And connect us to the world around us.
Exactly.
So nomad thought is not just about a different way of thinking, but also a different way of being.
It is.
A different way of relating to our own bodies and to the world we inhabit.
Precisely. It's about becoming nomads in the truest sense. Nomads of the mind, the body, and the world.
Embracing the fluidity, the openness, and the creative potential of becoming in its multifaceted glory.
Precisely.
And this brings us back to the question of how we cultivate this nomad thought in our everyday lives.
It's a process of ongoing experimentation, of challenging our assumptions, of seeking out new experiences and perspectives.
It's about learning to think and perceive in a more fluid, dynamic, and interconnected way.
It's about becoming attuned to the flows of energy and information that run through the universe. And finding our place within that vast and ever-evolving network of becoming.
This seems to imply that nomad thought is not a destination, but rather a journey.
A constant process of exploration and transformation.
Exactly.
It's not about arriving at some fixed point of arrival, but about embracing the perpetual movement and becoming that characterizes the universe itself.
So it's about becoming eternal returners.
It is.
Nomads of the cosmos.
Yes.
Forever wandering and creating, forever becoming other.
And as we delve deeper into nomad thought, it's important to recognize that it's not merely an abstract philosophical concept.
No.
It's a way of engaging with the world.
Okay.
A way of thinking and acting
right.
that has profound implications for how we live our lives.
So how do we translate these abstract ideas into concrete practices?
Right.
How do we actually cultivate nomad thought in our daily experience?
Deleuze and Guattari offer a number of suggestions.
Okay.
They emphasize experimentation.
Okay.
Pushing the boundaries of our comfort zones.
Right.
Disrupting our habitual patterns of thought and behavior.
So creating lines of flight.
Yes. To escape the confines of what they call molar structures.
Yeah.
And embrace the fluidity and dynamism of molecular flows.
Could you clarify what you mean by molar and molecular in this context?
Sure. They use these terms metaphorically
to
distinguish between different levels of organization.
Okay.
Molar structures are rigid, hierarchical, and fixed.
Can you give an example?
Think of institutions like the state,
right.
the family,
right.
or traditional systems of power.
Okay.
Molecular flows, on the other hand, are fluid, dynamic, and constantly shifting.
What would be an example of that?
They represent the flows of desire, affect, and communication that course through society.
So creating lines of flight involves escaping the control of these rigid molar structures.
Yes.
And tapping into the creative potential of molecular flows.
Precisely. It's about breaking free from the constraints that limit our thinking and acting, and opening ourselves to the possibility of becoming something new and unforeseen.
This idea of becoming seems really central to nomad thought.
It is.
Can you elaborate on what it means to become in this Deleuzian sense?
Sure. Becoming is not about achieving a fixed state of being,
but
rather about embracing the ongoing process of transformation.
So it's a process.
It is.
Not a goal.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that we are not static entities, but rather dynamic flows of energy and information, constantly interacting with the world around us and undergoing change.
So becoming is not a goal to be reached.
It's not.
But a process to be embraced.
Exactly. It's about surrendering to the fluidity and unpredictability of life. And allowing ourselves to be shaped by the forces of becoming that permeate the universe.
This seems to resonate with Nietzsche's concept of the eternal return.
It does.
Which also emphasizes the cyclical nature of existence.
Yes.
And the importance of embracing change.
The eternal return challenges us to affirm the entirety of existence, including its moments of creation and destruction, joy and suffering.
It invites us to see life as a dance of becoming then.
It does.
A perpetual interplay of forces that leads to constant transformation.
Precisely.
And nomad thought provides us with a framework for engaging with this dance of becoming, for navigating the complexities and uncertainties of a world in constant flux.
It offers us a set of concepts and practices that can help us to embrace the fluidity, the creativity, and the radical openness that characterize the philosophy of becoming.